Elijah Garner hadn't expected his day to take a turn for the better. It rarely did these days. Between juggling 2 jobs, overdue bills, and raising his 6-year-old son, Nolan, life felt like an endless uphill climb. But as he pushed open the glass door of the small corner cafe, with Nolan's tiny hand gripping his, something caught his eye. A purse. It was sitting on the booth near the window, abandoned. Expensive looking, smooth black leather with gold accents. Someone was going to be in a panic over this. "Daddy, whose is it?" Nolan's wide brown eyes blinked up at him. "I don't know, buddy," Elijah murmured, picking it up. It was surprisingly heavy. He glanced around, but the cafe was empty except for a barista too busy foaming milk to notice. He sighed. "Let's see if we can find out." He flipped it open, careful not to dig through it too much. He wasn't a thief, just enough to find some ID. And there it was, tucked neatly into a side compartment. Zara Jennings. Something about the name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Maybe she was a local. There was an address listed, somewhere uptown, a part of town Elijah didn't even drive through, let alone visit. "Think we should give it back?" he asked Nolan, who nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, Mommy always said being honest is important," Nolan chirped. Elijah's chest tightened for a moment. His late wife, Emily, had been the glue that held their little family together. Now it was just the two of them, figuring things out one day at a time. He ruffled Nolan's dark curls. "Then let's do the right thing." Zara Jennings paced the lobby of her company's high-rise, frustration tightening her chest. Her purse, her entire life was in there. Her wallet, her phone, her schedule, not to mention the key to her penthouse. How could she have been so careless? Jennings should have called security, her assistant Lauren asked. Zara exhaled sharply. "No, just wait, someone's here." The receptionist had picked up the phone, nodding and glancing toward the entrance. A moment later, the glass doors swung open, and in walked a man with a little boy at his side. Zara's breath caught. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark jacket worn but clean. His deep brown eyes swept the lobby with quiet caution, as if he didn't belong here. But it was the boy beside him that really made her chest tighten the way he clutched the man's hand, innocent and trusting. Then she saw what the man carried. "My purse." Elijah stepped forward, holding it out. "I think this belongs to you." Zara reached for it, their fingers brushing for just a second. A surprising jolt ran through her, unexpected, unsettling. "Where did you find it?" she asked, glancing up. "In a cafe downtown. You must have left it behind." Zara exhaled, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I did. I was running late," and she shook her head. "You have no idea how much trouble I would have been in without this." Elijah gave a small, polite nod. "Glad I could help." "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Really." "Daddy, can we get ice cream now?" Nolan suddenly piped up, tugging on Elijah's sleeve. Zara's gaze softened as she looked at the child. "You like ice cream?" Nolan nodded eagerly. "Strawberry's my favorite." Zara smiled. "That's a great choice." Then, on impulse, she looked at Elijah. "Let me buy you both ice cream as a thank you." Elijah hesitated. "Oh, that's not necessary." "I insist," she interrupted. "It's the least I can do." For a moment, he seemed ready to refuse again, but then Nolan tugged his sleeve. "Please, Daddy." Elijah sighed, giving Zara a wry glance. "Looks like I'm outnumbered." Zara grinned, then it settled. And just like that, a simple good deed turned into something far more unexpected. Zara led them to a sleek black town car waiting outside the building. The driver barely batted an eye as she slid in first, gesturing for Elijah and Nolan to follow. Elijah hesitated. This was already far beyond anything he was used to, but Nolan had climbed in before he could protest. With a resigned sigh, he followed, settling into the plush leather seat. Nolan bounced excitedly. "This car is so big, Daddy's is kinda small." Zara laughed, tucking her purse beside her. "Well, I like a little extra space." Elijah studied her. Now that he had a chance to really look, she was polished in a way that didn't belong to his world. Perfectly tailored clothes, a watch on her wrist that probably cost more than his rent. She carried herself with the kind of confidence only someone with power could. "I should probably mention," he said carefully, "I'm not exactly dressed for anywhere fancy." Zara waved a dismissive hand. "Ice cream isn't fancy." The driver pulled into motion, and Elijah forced himself to relax. Nolan was practically vibrating with excitement, turning to Zara. "Do you eat ice cream a lot?" "Not as much as I'd like," she admitted. "I work a lot." Elijah raised a brow. "What do you do?" "I run Jennings Enterprises." His stomach tightened. That was why her name had been familiar. Jennings Enterprises was everywhere in the city. Real estate, tech, logistics, they had a hand in everything. If she was at the top of that empire, she wasn't just rich. She was in a completely different universe. "Must be nice," he said after a beat. She studied him. "It's complicated. People think money solves everything, but it just brings different problems." Elijah let out a short laugh. "I'd trade my problems for yours any day." Zara tilted her head. "Would you?" Elijah met her gaze, unflinching. "Try raising a kid alone, working 2 jobs, wondering if this month's bills will get paid. Yes, I think I'd take a few boardroom headaches instead." Something flickered in her expression, but before she could respond, the car came to a stop. They had arrived. The ice cream parlor was nestled on a quiet street, far from the corporate high-rises. It had a cozy charm, with pastel-painted walls and the scent of sugar in the air. Nolan rushed to the counter, eyes wide as he surveyed the choices. Zara leaned in toward Elijah, her voice lower. "I didn't mean to sound dismissive earlier." He glanced at her. "Didn't you?" She hesitated. "Maybe, but it wasn't intentional." Elijah exhaled. "Look, I appreciate the ice cream, but we don't have to pretend we live in the same world." "Maybe not," she said, "but that doesn't mean we can't. I don't know, have a conversation." Before he could respond, Nolan tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, they have sprinkles." Elijah chuckled, grateful for the interruption. "Then get sprinkles, buddy." As they ordered, Zara surprised him by opting for a simple vanilla cone. He had expected something more extravagant. "You like plain vanilla?" he asked. She smiled. "It reminds me of when I was a kid. My dad used to take me for ice cream after school." Elijah nodded. "My wife used to do that with Nolan." Zara's expression softened. "You lost her." "Cancer," he said quietly, 2 years ago." She didn't offer empty condolences or pity. Instead, she simply nodded, as if acknowledging the weight of it. "I lost my father young," she said after a pause. "It never really stops hurting, does it?" "No," Elijah admitted, "but you find ways to keep going." They found a booth near the window, Nolan happily focused on his ice cream. Zara leaned in slightly. "I don't do this," she said. Elijah arched a brow. "Eat ice cream." She laughed. "No, I mean, sit in an ice cream shop with a stranger and his son." "Then why did you?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "You did something kind for me, and maybe I just wanted a break from my usual world." Elijah studied her. Despite the polished exterior, there was something lonely about her. He knew that feeling all too well. "You ever take breaks?" he asked. She exhaled. "Not really. When you're running a company like mine, there's no room for slowing down." "Sounds exhausting." "It is." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nolan piped up between bites, grinning. "This is the best ice cream ever." Zara smiled. "I'm glad you think so." Elijah watched her carefully. Maybe, despite their differences, they weren't as far apart as he had thought. As they stepped out of the ice cream parlor, Zara's driver was already waiting at the curb. The gleaming black car stood in stark contrast to the modest surroundings, drawing a few curious glances from passers-by. Elijah felt the weight of it, the divide between their worlds, but Nolan, still buzzing from his ice cream, remained blissfully unaware. "I can have my driver take you home," Zara offered. Elijah shook his head. "We're not far, we'll walk." Nolan, still holding Zara's hand from when he'd eagerly pulled her outside, beamed up at her. "Can we see you again?" Elijah tensed. That wasn't a question he'd expected, and judging by the flicker of surprise on Zara's face, she hadn't either. She hesitated, then crouched slightly to meet Nolan's eyes. "Would you like that?" Nolan nodded enthusiastically. "You're nice, and you got the best ice cream." Zara laughed softly, but her gaze flickered to Elijah, searching for his reaction. Elijah exhaled. "You don't have to feel obligated." "I don't," she said simply, "but I wouldn't mind seeing you both again." Nolan cheered, and Elijah found himself at a loss for words. He had walked into the cafe earlier that day with no expectations beyond getting a cup of coffee. Now, he was standing on a city street, caught in some strange, unexpected moment with a woman he would have never crossed paths with otherwise. Zara reached into her purse, pulled out a sleek black card, and handed it to him. "That's my number, just in case." Elijah hesitated before taking it. "I don't exactly run in your circles." She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her expression. "Maybe that's the point." With that, she stepped into the car, the door closing behind her with a quiet thud. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the city traffic. Elijah stared at the card in his hand, still warm from her touch. "Daddy," Nolan said, tugging his sleeve, "are we gonna call her?" Elijah sighed, slipping the card into his pocket. "We'll see, buddy." Days passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Work, school drop-offs, late nights balancing bills. But every time Elijah reached into his pocket, his fingers brushed against the card, a silent reminder of the woman who had momentarily stepped into their world. It wasn't until the end of the week that he found himself dialing the number. He told himself it was just to say thanks, nothing more. Zara answered on the third ring. "I was wondering if you'd ever use that number." Elijah leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Nolan color at the small table. "I didn't want to assume you meant it." "I don't say things I don't mean." He paused, considering his next words. "Nolan keeps asking if we'll see you again." "And what do you think?" Elijah exhaled. "I think you live in a world that doesn't have much room for people like me." Zara was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "Meet me tomorrow. Let's see if that's true." Against his better judgment, he agreed. The next evening, Zara was waiting for them outside a quiet park on the edge of downtown. She wasn't in her usual polished business attire. Instead, she wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You made it," she said as they approached. Nolan ran up to her immediately. "Did you bring ice cream again?" Zara laughed. "Not this time, but I did bring something." From behind her, she pulled out a small kite, still neatly folded. Nolan's eyes widened. "We're flying kites." "If you want to." Nolan grabbed Elijah's hand, practically bouncing. "Can we, Daddy?" Elijah shook his head in disbelief but smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we can." As they moved toward the open field, Zara fell into step beside Elijah. "Didn't take you for a kite person," he admitted. She shrugged. "I used to love it as a kid, thought Nolan might like it too." Elijah glanced at her, taking in the way she watched Nalan with genuine warmth. He had assumed their worlds were too different, that whatever this was would fade as quickly as it had started. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to Zara Jennings than he had thought. The wind tugged at the kite as Nalan ran across the grass, his laughter ringing through the open space. Elijah stood back, hands in his pockets, watching as Zara knelt beside Nalan, showing him how to angle the kite just right to catch the breeze. "You have to let it go at the right moment," she instructed, her voice light with amusement. Nalan nodded seriously, gripping the string tightly. "Like this." "Exactly," she said, standing up just as the kite soared higher. Elijah couldn't look away. There was something about the way she was so effortlessly involved in Nalan's joy, completely present, without hesitation, that caught him off guard. He had assumed she was too busy, too far removed from a life like his, but here she was, laughing as Nalan cheered at their success. She turned to Elijah, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "You're quiet." He exhaled, just taking it in. She studied him for a moment before stepping closer, lowering her voice. "You don't trust this, do you?" Elijah glanced toward Nalan, making sure he was still occupied. "It's not about trust, it's about reality." Zara tilted her head. "Reality?" He gestured vaguely. "This, you, me, Nalan, it's easy now in a park with a kite. But what happens when your world collides with mine? When people start asking why you're spending time with someone who doesn't belong in your circles?" Her expression didn't shift. If anything, she looked more determined. "You think I care what people say?" "You should," he said. "You have a company to run, a reputation to uphold." She crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "And what if don't want to live by those rules?" Elijah let out a slow breath. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that whatever was happening between them wasn't just a fleeting distraction for her. But he had spent too long being cautious, too long making sure Nalan never faced disappointment. Zara must have sensed his hesitation because she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his wrist. "I know this isn't simple, Elijah, but I don't do things halfway. If I didn't want to be here, I wouldn't be." He looked down at where her fingers rested against his skin. It was such a small touch, but it sent something sharp and undeniable through him. Before he could respond, Nalan came running back, his face flushed with excitement. "That was the best kite ever." Zara grinned. "You did all the work." Nalan puffed out his chest. "Maybe next time we can fly 2 kites." Elijah tensed, but Zara didn't miss a beat. "I'd like that." Nalan turned to Elijah. "Can we, Daddy?" Elijah swallowed, his gaze flicking to Zara's. He saw the quiet expectation there, the unspoken question she wasn't asking aloud. He nodded. "Yes, buddy, we can." Something in Zara's expression softened, and for the first time, Elijah let himself believe just a little that maybe this wasn't fleeting after all. The next time they met, it wasn't at a park. Zara had invited them to a quiet little restaurant, one tucked away from the usual crowds. The moment they stepped inside, Elijah knew it wasn't a place he would have chosen on his own. The atmosphere was intimate, the lighting warm but dim, the kind of setting that made it impossible to ignore the weight of unspoken things. Nalan, oblivious to any tension, immediately brightened at the sight of a small basket of breadsticks on the table. "Can I have one?" Zara smiled. "Of course." Elijah sat across from her, watching as Nalan happily munched away. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," she said simply. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You're making it hard to keep my guard up." She rested her chin on her hand. "Good." He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You're impossible." "I hear that a lot." Nalan, completely uninterested in the undercurrents between them, looked up. "Daddy, do you like Miss Zara?" Elijah nearly choked on his drink, while Zara's lips twitched in amusement. "Well," she said, turning to Nalan, "what do you think?" Nalan beamed. "I think he does." Elijah groaned. "You're not supposed to gang up on me." Zara merely shrugged. "I like Nalan's instincts." Elijah shook his head, but he couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at his lips. As the evening went on, something shifted. The conversation flowed easily, with Nalan chiming in between bites of food, and Zara listening with a kind of patience Elijah hadn't expected. He caught himself watching her more than once, the way her eyes lit up when Nalan spoke, the way she leaned in slightly when Elijah talked. By the time they left the restaurant, Nalan was half asleep, his head resting against Elijah's shoulder. Zara stood beside them, watching as Elijah adjusted Nalan's weight in his arms. "This was nice," she said softly. Elijah met her gaze. He knew he should be cautious, should remind himself of all the reasons this wasn't a good idea. But standing there, with his son asleep against him and Zara looking at him like he was something worth choosing, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "Yeah," he admitted, "it was." She hesitated, then reached up, brushing a strand of hair from Nalan's forehead. Her fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary, and Elijah felt something shift between them. "I'll see you soon," she asked. He nodded. "Yes, you will." As she stepped back, watching them disappear into the night, Elijah realized something unsettling. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what came next. Elijah hadn't expected Zara to fit so easily into their lives, but somehow she did. She never pushed, never forced her way in, she just showed up, fully present, fully willing. Whether it was joining them for impromptu dinners, helping Nalan with a particularly tricky puzzle, or simply sitting with Elijah on his worn-out couch while Nalan dozed off, she made space for herself without demanding it. And somehow, Elijah found himself letting her in, little by little. Tonight, they were at his apartment, a modest 2-bedroom space that had seen better days, but was clean and filled with warmth. Nalan had insisted on making dinner his version of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which mostly involved making a mess while Elijah supervised. Zara, to Elijah's surprise, had jumped right in, laughing as she helped Nalan spread jelly across the bread with far more enthusiasm than precision. Nalan wiped at a smear of peanut butter on his cheek. "Miss Zara, do you have kids?" The question hung in the air for a beat longer than Elijah expected. Zara's smile softened, but there was something in her eyes, something fleeting, almost wistful. "No, I don't," she said. "Do you want some?" Nalan asked, completely oblivious to the weight of the question. Elijah shot him a look. "Buddy." But Zara just laughed, shaking her head. "It's okay. I don't know, Nalan. I've never really thought about it much." Nalan tilted his head. "I think you'd be a good mommy." Elijah cleared his throat, standing up. "All right, that's enough questions for today. Let's eat before this turns into a full-blown interrogation." Zara chuckled but didn't press the subject. Instead, she helped Nalan carry the sandwiches to the small table, acting as if nothing had shifted. But Elijah had seen that flicker of something in her expression, and it made him wonder. After dinner, Nalan fell asleep on the couch, curled up beneath his favorite blanket. Zara and Elijah sat side by side, the quiet between them comfortable but charged with something unspoken. "You never wanted kids?" he asked eventually. Zara exhaled, tucking her legs beneath her. "It's not that I didn't want them. I just never thought I'd have time for a family. My life has always been about work." Elijah nodded, watching her carefully. "But now?" She glanced toward Nalan, her expression unreadable. "Now, I'm not so sure." Elijah leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You know, when Emily and I found out she was pregnant, I was terrified. We weren't ready. We didn't have enough money, enough space, enough of anything." Zara turned to him, listening intently. But then he was born, Elijah continued, his voice quieter now. And suddenly, none of that mattered because he was ours, and somehow we figured it out. Zara smiled faintly. You're a good dad, Elijah. He let out a short laugh. Most days, I feel like I'm just trying to survive. She shook her head. No, you're doing more than that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Zara reached out, hesitating for just a second before resting her hand over his. Her touch was warm, grounding. Elijah, she said softly, what are we doing here? He inhaled deeply, his fingers tightening beneath hers. I don't know, but I know I don't want to stop. Something shifted in her expression, not hesitation, not doubt, but something deeper, something real. Neither do I, she admitted. And that was it. No grand declarations, no sweeping promises, just an understanding, quiet but certain. Zara wasn't a temporary presence in their lives anymore. She was staying. Elijah had never imagined his life intertwining with someone like Zara, but now it felt impossible to picture it without her. What had started as an unexpected encounter had turned into something undeniable, a presence that filled the spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. But there were still unspoken things between them, things he knew couldn't be ignored forever. That understanding settled in his chest as he stepped out onto the balcony of Zara's penthouse. The city stretched out before him, glittering under the night sky. Inside, Nolan was curled up on the couch, fast asleep after an evening of board games and laughter. Zara stood beside him, arms folded as she leaned against the railing. You're thinking about something, she observed. He exhaled, I'm always thinking about something. She turned to face him, and tonight. Elijah hesitated before meeting her gaze. You live in a world that moves fast, Zara. Decisions, deals, expectations, and I don't. She studied him for a long moment. You think I don't know that. I think it's easy to get caught up in something that feels good, he admitted. But at some point, reality catches up. Zara reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Then let's talk about reality. He gave her a questioning look. You and Nolan, you're my reality now, she said simply. I don't care what world I come from or how different our lives were before this. I know what I want, and it's right here. Elijah searched her face, looking for any trace of hesitation, but there was none. You're really sure about this? She squeezed his hand. I've never been more sure of anything. For the first time in a long time, the weight of uncertainty loosened its grip on Elijah's chest. Zara wasn't just saying words, she was choosing choosing them. And for a man who had spent years bracing for loss, that meant everything. Weeks passed, and their lives found a rhythm. Zara made time for them despite her demanding schedule, and Elijah found himself trusting that she wasn't going anywhere. Nolan had grown attached in a way that made Elijah both hopeful and wary, because if this didn't last, his son would be the one left with questions. But Zara didn't waver. One evening, Elijah found himself standing in the middle of an upscale boutique, feeling wildly out of place. Zara had insisted he needed a suit not for some corporate event, but for something important, something personal. You really think I need all this? He asked, eyeing the rows of neatly tailored jackets. Zara arched a brow. You deserve to wear something that fits how incredible you are. Elijah huffed a laugh. That's quite the statement for a guy who spends most of his time in work boots. She stepped closer, smoothing a hand over the lapel of a dark navy jacket. You don't see yourself the way I do, Elijah. Her words sent warmth through him, and he let himself lean into the moment. All right, he relented. Pick whatever you want. Zara beamed, and he knew then that he'd wear anything if it meant seeing that expression on her face. But what he didn't expect, what he never could have predicted, was the way the night unfolded. After dinner, Zara led him to a quiet rooftop, lanterns casting a soft glow over the space. A small table was set up, elegant but intimate. Elijah frowned. "What is all this?" Zara took a breath, then reached for his hands. "You once told me you never thought you'd have enough, not enough time, not enough certainty, not enough of anything. But I need you to know something, Elijah." He watched her, his heart pounding. "You are enough," she said. "You have always been enough." Then, to his complete shock, she dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. Elijah's breath caught. "Marry me," Zara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not because of grand gestures or the differences in our lives. Marry me because I love you, because I love Nalan, because this us is the only thing that makes sense." Elijah stared at her, stunned. He had never imagined a moment like this, never let himself dream that someone like Zara could want forever with him. But she did. And in that instant, he knew his answer. He pulled her up, cupping her face before pressing his lips to hers. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "Yes," he murmured, 1,000 times yes. Zara laughed softly, a sound filled with relief and joy. She slid the ring onto his finger because, of course, she had chosen something for him instead of herself. And for the first time in years, Elijah let himself believe in something bigger than survival. He believed in love. The wedding took place on the beach, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was small, just a handful of close friends, a few colleagues of Zara's, and most importantly, Nalan, who insisted on wearing a suit just like Elijah's. As they exchanged vows, Elijah couldn't take his eyes off Zara. She was breathtaking, but more than that, she was his. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Nalan cheered louder than anyone, running up to hug them both. Elijah lifted him up, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead before turning to Zara, his heart full. "We did it," she murmured. He grinned. "Yes, we did." The night was filled with laughter, dancing, and moments Elijah knew he'd never forget. And as he held his wife in his arms, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was exactly where he was meant to be. With her. With their family. Forever.